Hey folks, Randy Newberg here. How you doing today? Today we're going to walk through and build an e-scouting plan for use during one of the 3 food pattern periods. And you might be saying, wait a second, what are those? Well, we're going to get into all that because there are 3 periods of the ELK calendar where food and forage is the primary influence. And doing an e-scouting plan for that is completely different than the last 2 periods when sanctuaries are the primary influence. These are brought to you by Go Hunt and their Explorer Map series. If you want to get all 50 states, all the mapping tools that you're going to see me using right here, this is what you do. You go out to gohunt.com, sign up for Explorer, and for $49 you get all 50 states, but they'll give you $20 of gear money, in other words, mad money in their gear shop if you use promo code Randy. So I'm going to give you a little background, why we do a certain thing, and you're going to have some questions of, well, why that, why this, why not that? And hopefully I can cover most of that in the background of what I have here. And then we're going to get into screenshots of showing how we use these tools and what this end product is. This end product is something that you do on your desktop, but because of the mobile desktop integration with the Go Hunt maps, it's available for you to take out in the field on your mobile device. Best of all worlds. So here we go. We're going to walk through how I do an e-scouting plan for the early season, the pre-rut, and the peak rut. Those are the food pattern periods. In the early season, the reason it's a food pattern is the bulls are trying to get as fat as possible. They know the rut's coming up, they're not going to be eating a lot, and then they jump right into winter. So in August, which is that early season, they are out there devouring anything that looks edible and digestible. And then we get into the next 2 periods, the pre-rut and the peak rut. And you've probably heard me say many times, well, breeding is the primary need in those 2 calendar periods. Yep, it is. But we are going to hunt breeding periods as a food pattern because to have breeding, you need females. So during these periods, and probably all other times of the year, cow elk are on the best possible food the landscape can provide. So in effect, when the elk, the bull elk, are looking for cows, you're going to find them with the cows, and you're going to find the cows where the best forage is. So that makes breeding periods a hunting period when you should focus on food. Elk forage is changing across the landscape with time. Every week, every other week, every month, what available forage and what is the highest quality forage moves. It's not a static thing. And so the cow elk move across the landscape in this same manner to take maximum utilization of the highest quality forage at the least amount of output, in other words, the lowest energy cost to do so, and the least amount of risk to do so. So that's what a cow elk does. And it has to do with what the caloric demands, the energy demands of a cow elk are. So if you start I'm going to start in November. They now are pregnant. They're carrying a fetus. So they have this gestation period that adds about an extra 20% to 30% of additional caloric demand on their body based on what their environmental conditions will be throughout this entire period until they have that calf in June. And you'd think, okay, late May, early June, the calf's on the ground, their demands go way down. No, their demands go way up because they are lactating. The burden of lactation adds a huge demand, almost anywhere from 50 to 70% increase in energy demands on a cow elk. And lactation lasts about 105 days. So you do the math, that means about the first part of September, they're going to wean this calf. And now a cow elk has 6 to 8 weeks to just absolutely put the feed bag on. Like, how do I gain as much fat as possible? They haven't, the cow elk haven't done these studies, but they know internally the more fat they have, the greater the likelihood of pregnancy and the greater the likelihood of survival of them and that calf come next spring. So this period of time when we are hunting food patterns, kind of that 6 weeks period that starts September 1st, runs till the middle of October, cow elk are active. They are grazing and foraging as much as they possibly can because their target is they want to get to at least 10% body fat, maybe 15% body fat. So if you think about a 425-pound cow elk with 0 body fat, to get to 15% body fat, they got to get to 500 pounds. In other words, put on 75 pounds of fat. that takes a lot of foraging. So that's why we are hunting this as food and forage pattern. So even though the elk are going to be in groups, you know, the cow elk, her and her herd mates are in this pattern where they're moving across the landscape. They're going to be harassed by bulls during this period. And yeah, they're going to, you know, succumb to the demands of the bull sometime in that breeding period. But for the most part, it's still food, food, and food. And I provide all that background to try and establish why the pre-rut and the peak rut are really food patterns. Even when breeding is the primary need for bulls, food is what's driving the cows. So the 4 basic food types, if you list them based on how much is digestible and absorbable in terms of true calories they get out of it, well, the number 1 would be agriculture, followed by forbs, followed by grasses, and the least nutritional, in other words, the lowest return for the amount that they take in is shrubs. Now, if we go over and compare that to what they actually utilize, which is a function of availability on their landscape, number 1 is grasses. Number 2 is forbs, number 3 is shrubs, and last is agriculture because it's not present in a lot of places. So you got to be thinking about that. If you are hunting where agriculture is present, none of the natural or native food sources are going to compete with what the net caloric benefit or energy benefit is to alfalfa. Irrigated alfalfa is going to attract the elk more so than shrubs, forbs, and grasses over here on the natural landscape. But for most of this, we're going to talk about wild public land landscapes, right? There's not a lot of center pivots out there on the BLM and Forest Service. So we're going to focus on e-scouting these natural landscapes. So in order to think about it that way, we should focus on what the utilization is, because that's a function of availability during the periods we are hunting. So under that scenario, we would rank utilization as grasses first, forbs second, and shrubs third. And now you might be saying, Randy, why does all this matter? Well, it goes back to the fact that a cow elk is super smart. They know that if they go over here with forbs, they're going to get more benefit per amount of energy they intake and how much they expend to get that forage. But forbs are usually a summer type plant, so they're going to be using grasses for a greater period of the year. So even though we know that the forbs are the most digestible and provide the greatest energy benefit or calorie benefit per pound consumed, there's an issue. And here is that issue. In most elk habitat, forbs are most abundant in May, June, and July. Thus, elk are out there just hammering those during these summer months. But as the landscape starts to dry out in August, forbs become much more scarce. They're harder to find unless you get, some strange August rains and stuff like that. And the grasses become more prevalent, more abundant, taller, make up a larger portion of the actual volume of forage that's out there. So by the time hunting season comes, you're seeing a shift from forbs, which grow on certain parts of the landscape, over to grasses, which grow on different parts of the landscape, in different types of soil, and different types of exposure to the sun, different types of moisture requirements. So you got to be thinking about that. Just because they love forbs doesn't mean you can hunt a pattern that is a food pattern based on forbs if there aren't any out on the landscape. And I'm here to tell you that in most places where I hunt, grass has become the primary food source once hunting season gets here. Now, some of the Southwest states, if you get a strong monsoon season in July and August, yeah, you're going to get a ton of grasses, but you will get a big bloom of forbs that happens as a result of that moisture. So just be thinking about this. The odds are your forbs are going to dry up and the elk are going to convert over to grasses. So that's why you're going to see most of this video and most of this e-scouting plan I'm talking about is anticipating where the best grasses will grow in the greatest abundance during the time I'm hunting, which is usually September and the first part of October when I'm hunting the pre-rut or the peak rut. But before we go any further, I want to go back to your question that I think you probably had. And that question is, how do I find what are the preferred grasses where I will be hunting? In other words, what do elk utilize in this hunting unit? Well, I'm going to take a paragraph from a study that I have. Well, this one happens to be an elk forage study for Yellowstone National Park, which the reason I find it helpful is it's not like Yellowstone Park has its own little ecosystem of forage. You can almost apply that to places surrounding Yellowstone in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. So it's really good data for me to be thinking about when I do e-scouting in other places. So I'm going to throw a screenshot up here that shows just one little extract of this study. And it's kind of a summary. It says fall. Grass was the predominant class of forage used on most types during fall. So they've broken out the habitat types by 3 different categories in Yellowstone. Bluegrass was the most important single item on sampled valley meadow type. So one of their categories was valley meadow types. Bluegrass was most important, averaging 91% of the recorded use. June grass, blue bunch, wheatgrass, bluegrass, and lupine were the most important on the sagebrush types. So that combined use was 70%, right? We're still sticking with grasses other than the lupines, those are more of a forb. The increased use of grass on these types appears to be in response to most forbs losing their succulents and fall rains causing new leaf growth on bluegrasses and June grasses. So this is straight from a study. And I could go on and on. But what do I know from this? I know how important the grasses are. And so I can go to Google, and I have, it's like, okay, tell me where wheatgrass, bunchgrass, June grass, tell me what it looks like, tell me where it grows, what elevation bands, all that kind of stuff. So now I know, based on this study, that in the fall, when I'm hunting, here's the primary food source. Now, it's pretty easy for me to find out where that stuff grows and go and put those places on a map, which becomes my e-scouting plan. So, hopefully that information, or just this sample or this example, shows you how I understand what elk are going to be searching for in September when I plan to be hunting them in the hunting unit I would have. So yeah, this is a study from Yellowstone. I could go and Google the same type of data for Western Colorado, if that's where my hunt was. Or I could do the same for Northern Utah, if that's where my hunt was. There are studies out there that have explored this to the deepest end. So with that, we're going to get started, and I'm going to give you a couple little pieces here about my rationale for what I'm doing. And I'm going to walk through and explain the rationale behind every waypoint that I've marked, why I've selected this campsite, and why I'm giving myself as many options as possible, because I'm doing this for the normal hunt we have, which is 5 days, okay? We're showing up someplace we probably have never been before. We have 5 days to sort it out, figure it out, hopefully pack it out. A little bit more is that there's a Go Hunt tool called terrain analysis tool that you're going to see me using. And it has shortcutted this process in a way like it was almost an answer to my dreams. Because you've heard me say many times, I'm trying to eliminate the places where elk aren't so I can focus on where they are. And that is how this terrain analysis tool comes into play, whether I'm e-scouting for these 3 food patterns, the early, pre, and peak rut, or even if I'm doing it for the last 2 seasons, which are the post-rut and the late season. So bedding, right? A couple things we know about bedding. Elk prefer to bed in terrain that is less than a 20-degree slope. We know that, and I can go into way more detail on that, but there's studies out there that show that. So the Go Hunt terrain analysis tool lets me select slopes of whatever the aspect ratio I want. And then I also know that elk in the September season, thermal regulation, in other words, staying cool, is a primary consideration they give when they are foraging. Why? Because elk spend as much time or as much effort and calories, energy, thermal regulating to stay cool as they do thermal regulating to stay hot. So it doesn't do an elk any good to go and forage somewhere and take in a bunch of calories if they're so hot they're burning most of those calories just to stay cool. So that's why bedding, adjacent and nearby bedding cover, is pretty important to this. So they know the net caloric intake, the net energy intake, is what they're looking for. So it's going to be a combination of the forage and the cost, the energy cost to acquire that. And the one last point I want to leave you with is that when we are e-scouting for food patterns, which are those first 3 calendar periods, we're looking for general areas, okay? It's not like, oh, this bunch grass or this bluegrass or this fescue only grows in this, 1 acre spot. It grows in general areas. So we're looking for general areas to go and hunt and explore and call and look for elk, as opposed to when you see us do the video for a sanctuary period, we're looking for precise little places, less than an acre maybe. Where are these places where a bull is going to go in bed? What's the spot on the spot? So when you see this, you're going to see that, wow, this is kind of spread out a lot more. Well, yeah, in food pattern periods, there's a lot more mobility. There's a lot more movement by elk across the landscape during the peak rut, during the pre-rut, compared to sanctuary periods when they're just augured in. So in this e-scouting, we're going to use Yellowstone National Park, just 70 miles this way, because it serves as a great example. I mean, the same principles apply, even though, yeah, no one's, well, you better not be hunting in Yellowstone. Right here, you'll see a wider view of Yellowstone National Park. And you're going to see, I've already got a bunch of waypoints in here. I've got a bunch of green ones, which the green ones say food patterns for e-scouting. Then you're going to see a bunch of orange ones that show glassing, show binoculars, and some yellow ones. And those are for the next video. So the first thing I like to do is right now, I'm in the satellite mode. I like to go to the hybrid mode. So that gives me a little bit idea of what the contour lines are and everything. So I've picked this area just because I want to give some ideas of how I approach this. You'll see right away that there are some places that the blue spot is my camp. I'm assuming, okay, there's a road, there's a trailhead right here. And in Yellowstone, there aren't roads like there are on the National Forest or the BLM, so we kind of have to make believe there are roads. And let's assume that I'm right at the end of a road with a trailhead where this camp is right here. And you'll see I've written in there, pre-rut, peak rut camp. In other words, for those types of hunts, this is where I'm going to camp. And you'll see that some of them are pretty close by. But then there are some of them that are quite a ways away from my camp, or I'd have to put in a pretty good morning hike to get there. Well, that's all right. Again, you want to give yourself options. And know that when elk are on a food pattern, they're less disturbed by human activity. Now, we get to rifle seasons, and they know, hey, get out of Dodge, go hide somewhere. So, over here, you're going to see that Go Hunt has this really, really helpful tool. This is about a year of work that I've done, kind of giving them my thoughts and feedback and begging for this, but I'm going to turn it on. And you're going to see that right now I have elevation bands. This is back when I was doing some e-scouting for the late season. I can select any elevation band I want. You can see over to the right, as I do that, some areas come in and out of the screen. Well, I'm not that worried about elevation bands when I'm doing a food-based pattern. I know most of the areas I'm hunting here are between 7,500 and 10,500 feet. But this is where things really get important to me. So you can see all these aspect ratios. It shows which direction the slope faces. Well, I know from doing studies that a lot of the slopes that are beneficial to bedding elk are oriented northwest, northeast, and even east, because when the afternoon sun gets its hottest, the east provides more shade. So I'm kind of crossing off anything that's southeast, south, southwest, or west. And I know that I'm looking for slopes that, an elk will bed at something 20 degrees or steeper, but they prefer not to, especially cow elk. Cow elk prefer to be somewhere 15 degrees or less. So you can see these slope categories that I'm selecting here. If I say, okay, 0 to 5 degrees, maybe 5 to 15 degrees. Now, when you see that, you'll see that all of a sudden my maps have a lot of green areas that meet all the criteria I'm looking for. Like, whoa. My old statement of eliminate all the places where elk likely aren't and focus on the places where they are, well, that's the tool that helps me do that. Look at this map. Look at how much terrain I've eliminated just by selecting 3 criteria: elevation, slope orientation, and slope degrees. Now I can go to this and say, all right, what are the places that are the greatest likelihood of having forage that elk will like? And I've done this, I've done the research, found the study. Okay, where are the bunch grasses? Where are the June grass? All that. Well, I know that there's certain types of moisture that they want. I know that burns and the edge of burns have a whole lot of that stuff. So it's like, all right, now I'm going to go to my layers and I want to make sure, absolutely. So I'm going, this is the Wyoming part of Yellowstone. So I'm going to go in here and you see that there are all of these different features you can turn on or turn off. I'm going to turn off wildfires right now. So if I turn off wildfires, it's like, I really wish I knew where there were some burns, because I know the pattern that they create, that's going to be some of the primary areas. I know also that anything with creeks, anything that has a slight riparian area to it, probably has some good grasses. So you'll see what happens to my screen here, especially down where this burn was down here in this part. I'm going to turn the layer of fires back on, and you will see when I hit turn that on, all of a sudden, here comes this big burn from 2016. Aha, this is a really good starting place. Well, some might say, why would you camp in the middle of a burn? Well, if that's where the trailhead ends, that's where I'm camping. And I don't hunt, you'll see here, that elk do not utilize the core area of a burn very much. There's no thermal regulation value, there's very little bedding cover, and they know that they're highly exposed. The other part is the interior core part of a burn probably burned hotter, and so it takes a lot longer for the soil and the plants to recover. So you'll see this is a really great fire because it's got all these little fingers like you see me working on right here. An elk would not want to be way out here. They'll be feeding up in these little fingers because this is where the area where the elk or the fire burned a lot less intense. So it'll recover quicker, but it still has all that nutrient value. So anywhere along this fire, you're going to see that I am planning to hunt and go and check out any place that's a little finger, any place that's along an edge. And then over here, I got this spot where there's a big patch of timber that didn't burn. Well, a lot of times, if you get a big patch of timber that's surrounded by a fire, that's great bedding cover for elk. So you can see there's an awful lot of places where I know based on where grasses grow at this elevation, this one up here, okay, this is kind of a riparian area. So I'm not saying I got to go to this exact spot where the waypoint is. I'm saying this basin, this general area right here meets all my criteria. There's a lot of this that you see highlighted in green that from my use of the terrain analysis tool, this is the kind of place elk would be. So I could spend a whole morning in there. This over here, you can see, this has all of the places that an elk might be interested in because the terrain analysis tool, this lighter green stuff you see here, it's within my elevation band. It has a slope of 15 degrees or less, and it's oriented northwest, north, northeast, or east. So these places, any of these places might have forage, but I'm also, in this food period, I'm looking for where are the good bedding places because the elk don't stand out and feed all day, right? They feed, they go in bed, they come out, they feed a little bit, they go back in bed. They keep doing that. They're an ungulate. They feed, they regurgitate, they chew their cud, they digest, and then they got to get more food. And that process keeps going on all day, and especially at night. They don't want to have to travel too far from these bedding areas that all of the classic bedding areas that you would see where they can thermal regulate really well are highlighted in this kind of lime green color. Well, that's a really important part of them for their net caloric intake. So hopefully I showed you some real precise reasons of why I picked this spot or this spot or this spot and why they're on my map. But now I want to talk about the bigger picture of my 5 days of hunting. Okay, I can probably cover these 3 areas in 1 day of hunting. Okay, I know elk are mobile in these periods. I know they're going to be vocal. I'm sure I can inspect all of this in a day of hunting. So that's probably the first day I'd hunt. If I didn't have a day to scout, my first place is I'd go right here. Well, maybe I find something, maybe I don't. You never leave elk to find elk. So if I had found elk, I would keep working that area. Now it's like, okay, I didn't find anything in this general area. I'm going to move up here. And you can see there are 3 areas. Yeah, it's going to take me a bit of a hike to get in there. You know, this is almost 3 miles away. So I'm going to leave in the dark and I'm going to start hoofing it over here. And I'm going to hunt these areas for a day. And again, if I see elk, I'm staying there. I am not going to leave elk when I've found them. That's the hardest part. So let's say that day 2, I'm up here, I haven't found any elk. All right, time to shake it up a little bit. So now I'm going to hike over here, and this is probably a 4-mile hike into some of this country. This is a little flatter, next to the burn. It's, you know, it's a different type of habitat than this rougher country up here. So every day I'm trying to alter or tweak a little bit. What are options that say, okay, maybe I gotta go to a little bit higher country, or maybe they're in this, you know, lodgepole, thicker timber. If I'm hunting the same, if I only give myself the same options every day, the likelihood is I'm not experimenting enough that I'm gonna stumble into what is the pattern they're using for this week that I'm hunting. So day 3, I'm over here, I got a few spots. Now, if I haven't found anything by day 3, it's like, all right, I got to shake it up. So I'm probably going to have to get up early, jump in my truck, and I'm going to have to drive way around over. I'm going to say, all right, there's these spots over here I can get to. Well, these spots right here, these 3 are somewhat similar. It's rockier. There's not a burn, but maybe hunting pressure has pushed elk in there. So I can come over here and I can try this on day 3. Well, if I still don't find any elk, a lot of times where I find them, if pressure's been pretty intense, is way back up in the head of these basins. So on my last day, maybe I got to hike in here. You know, I'll come park over here and I'll hoof it in there and I'll hike all the way back in there. So that's kind of my strategy of how I have 5 days, general areas, because these are food patterns. These are not sanctuary patterns where you got to be super precise. I'm looking for general areas. So what gives me 5 full days of options? Right here, day 1, pretty good option. Day 2, hopefully a good option. Day 3, a good option. Day 4, it's, you know, getting a bit further out there and going to be more work, but no one said elk hunting's easy. And if I haven't found elk by day 4, guess what? This is like the Hail Mary. I better get my butt up early in the morning, even though I probably don't want to. This is, I got to have something that's different than everything else. So I'm going to be up in these kind of alpine pockets up here. There's some avalanche chutes. There's some other stuff that's opened up the canopy. I know it's moist in there. I know there are grasses. Maybe this is where the elk got pushed. So hopefully you see this. And you can visualize it both from the big standpoint and then the precise part of, okay, why did I pick this spot? Why did I pick that spot? Well, first of all, it's got to be somewhere near the lime green that my terrain analysis tool has told me is likely to hold elk. So you'll see every one of these are areas with quite a bit of that identified property or identified landscape that the terrain analysis tool picks out. So here's the real deal. Okay, this is how I approach it. I started by knowing that the elk were on a feed pattern. I kind of tightened it down by doing my research to say, okay, these are the grasses they're looking for. I went and did a bunch of research of where do these types of grasses grow. So with that knowledge, now I come to my computer, I set my terrain analysis tool to give me the manner or the ability to get rid of most of the places that wouldn't meet my criteria and focus on the places that do meet my criteria. And then my goal is I've got 5 days, so I better have 5 general areas for each day. And those general areas got to be very different. I don't want them all to be the same. And within each of the 5 areas, I got to have 2 or 3 kind of pockets of, okay, I should go check out this and this and this. And it gives me kind of a plan of how I'm going to hunt that day. And because I know these are feed patterns, I know it can be hot. I know thermal regulation is a big issue for elk in September. you'll see part of my criteria is adjacent bedding areas. And I've done enough research to know that adjacent bedding areas are usually going to have an aspect ratio pointing northwest, north, northeast, or east. And I know that it's going to be a slope somewhere for cow elk, probably 15 degrees or less. And now that I have this, it's saved here on my Go Hunt map system. Whether I have the Explorer version or the Insider version, the mapping system is the same in either of those. And because I've done it all here, and it's really easy to do on a big screen, it's available to take with me on my phone out in the hills, and I have a pattern for everything that I want to do. It's just, which one of these am I going to do on day one? Assess and learn, and then I'm going to proceed to day two if I haven't found any elk. You know what I say, wash, rinse, repeat. You kind of do the same thing every day, but make sure every day you're checking out a different type of habitat. So anyhow, hopefully this long video walks you through how I do e-scouting for any of the 3 food calendar periods, the early season, the pre-rut, or the peak rut. And in another video, we're going to do the last 2 calendar periods, which are sanctuary influencing periods, the post-rut and the late season. So if you like these tools, if you like this map system, go to Go Hunt, sign up for Explorer. And when you do, you'll get all 50 states, and you'll get it for 49 bucks. And if you use promo code Randy, they'll give you $20 of free mad money. Yeah, $20 to go spend in their gear shop. Thanks for watching.